Let's practice the TOEFL IBT speaking together right now. On test day, you will have 4 questions. Question type 1, 2, 3, and 4. This practice, we're going to do 10, so you get a lot of practice, and we're going to practice all the question types. So, question type number 1, the first 4 questions will be question type number 1. Questions 5 and 6 will be question type number 2, 7 and 8, question type 3, 9 and 10, question type number 4. So be sure to stay to the end to do question type number 4 because most people find those the most difficult. Now, how are we going to answer the questions? Okay, so this is what you're going to do. Is basically I'm going to give you the same time that you'll get for each question on test day, and then you will answer the question. You should record your voice. After you're finished recording your voice, I'm going to give you a grading checklist. I'll put a slide on the video that'll look something like this, and you should either answer the questions or analyze your speaking and give a general idea of how you did. When you analyze your speaking, pick one thing you want to do better. Don't say, everything was bad and I have to do the same thing again. No, pick one thing you want to do better. For example, I want to pronounce the phrase "in my opinion" more naturally. Or I want to say the professor discusses with better pronunciation. Pick one thing you want to do better next time, okay? And then listen to the sample response. I give a sample response for each question. Just be aware, the sample response has been checked, edited, re-recorded. I've really put a lot of time and effort. These are not so natural. I try to make them sound natural, but really they're very high-level responses. They're just examples so you can see what a perfect response is. So don't get discouraged comparing your speaking responses to the examples. And this is similar to how we work with students at tstprep.com. So if you need more help, you need teachers, courses, lessons, evaluations, we have it all at tstprep.com. This is how we work with students. You practice, we listen to it together, and we practice another one together. So that support is what some people need to help them improve their TOEFL score. And if you're not sure where to start, check out the TOEFL Speaking Evaluation. This is a 30-minute one-on-one meeting with a teacher where they will analyze your strengths, weaknesses, and what you need to do to improve. And I'm going to put a coupon code here as well so you can get 10% off of that. So that's it. Let's start practicing TOEFL Speaking question type number 1. Good luck, everybody.
Directions. You will now be asked a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to plan your response and 45 seconds to speak. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Children and teenagers should not be allowed to use any social media until they're 18 years old. You have 15 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 45 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. I have to say that I agree with this statement. Children and teenagers under 18 years old are too young to use social media. I remember when I was in high school and everyone started using Facebook. I posted so many status updates that when I look back on it now as an adult, I feel embarrassed and silly. I realize now that it's a public application and I shared so much personal information on there. Also, I see kids and teens using all kinds of social media sites inappropriately and sharing their information with complete strangers. I feel like at this age, they don't understand all of the possible negative repercussions of their actions. This is why I think people under 18 shouldn't be allowed to use social media. Directions. You will now be asked a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to plan your response and 45 seconds to speak. A community garden has just opened up in your neighborhood. Each member of the neighborhood is expected to contribute in some way. Would you rather donate money, help plant vegetables, or sell vegetables in the local market? You have 15 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 45 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. For me, I would prefer to help plant vegetables than donate money or sell vegetables at the market. I love gardening, and being a part of the process of growing seeds into food we can actually eat is an amazing feeling. I remember as a kid, my sister and I always had our own gardens at home. My mom would buy us the plants we wanted, and we had to plant them, water them, and pull the weeds out. As we got older, we got bigger gardens and more responsibility. Ever since then, I found gardening to be relaxing, nurturing, and educational. I also love getting my hands dirty and working in the earth. That's why I would prefer to help plant the vegetables rather than sell them or donate money. Directions. You will now be asked a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to plan your response and 45 seconds to speak. Do you agree or disagree with the following statement? All university students should be required to volunteer in order to graduate. You have 15 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 45 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. I do think all university students should have to volunteer in order to graduate. In my opinion, it's critical that citizens volunteer within their communities. For example, I grew up volunteering alongside my mother. We lived in a small town, so it was important that people volunteered. Otherwise, there'd be no programs for the residents. I learned to give back to my community and contribute to society. I also developed a variety of skills from coordinating children's activities, organizing community events, and caring for the elderly. These skills actually helped me land my first job as a teacher's assistant. I didn't have the work experience, but I had volunteered to do something similar at a local elementary school. That's why I think it should be required that all university students volunteer. Directions. You will now be asked a question about a familiar topic. After you hear the question, you will have 15 seconds to plan your response and 45 seconds to speak. You are planning on going to the museum next weekend. Would you prefer to go alone, with a friend, or with a tour guide? You have 15 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 45 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. If I had to choose, I would definitely opt for going to a museum alone. To be honest, I like doing things on my own. When you're by yourself, you're more open to your surroundings and more likely to meet new people. I still remember when I went on a 6-month backpacking trip across Asia without any idea of where I was going or who I was going to meet. I'll never forget meeting my good friend James in Laos for the first time and volunteering at a local orphanage for a week. It was a completely unplanned adventure that I would never have been able to do if I had plans with someone else. That's why I would much rather go to a museum solo. Directions. You will now read a short passage, then listen to a conversation on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. The university is planning to implement a new graduation requirement. You have 45 seconds to read the announcement. You may begin reading now. Now listen to two students discussing the announcement.
Hi, James. How did you do on the chemistry exam?
Oh, hey Susan, it went okay.
So, did you see the announcement about mandatory volunteering?
Yeah, I did. I think it's a great idea.
How so?
Well, I think it's important for the school to give back. I mean, we're all part of the community, right? This will also improve the school's image. Instead of looking like a bunch of kids who just want to party, we can show that we're willing to contribute and help others.
Yeah, I see what you mean about that. But do you really think it should be mandatory?
Well, in high school, I had to read to older people at a retirement home, and I loved it. I never would have done it if I hadn't been forced to. Plus, I agree with the idea that once you experience volunteering, you gain a new appreciation and want to volunteer more. That's what happened to me anyway. I still volunteer at a women's shelter on the weekends.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, anyways, which way are you headed? Now, answer the question. The man expresses his opinion on mandatory volunteering. State his opinion and explain the reasons he gives for holding that opinion. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now.
The university announces a change to the graduation requirements. It is now going to be mandatory for students to volunteer at a charity in order to graduate. The goal is to improve the university's relationship with the community by giving something back. Also, they think helping those in need will be a good experience for students beyond graduation day. The man in the conversation expresses his opinion on this plan, and he is very much in support of it. He explains how the public image of the school is pretty negative and agrees that volunteering will help to change that. Also, he has had experience before, volunteering at a retirement home. He found that it encouraged him to do more for the community, and even now, he volunteers at a women's shelter. Clearly, he is in favor of this change to the graduation requirements.
Directions. You will now read a short passage and then listen to a conversation about the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a conversation about the same topic.
Hi, Peter. Did you hear they're going to make 2 graduation ceremonies this year?
Yeah, they say it's due to enrollment numbers. Too many students getting their diplomas at once makes the ceremony last for hours.
I really don't like that. What if some of my friends are assigned to a different ceremony than mine? We've been waiting for this day for years, and now what?
Well, have you ever sat through the graduation ceremony? I went last year and it lasted almost 3 hours. And it took almost an hour to just read the names.
That's my point. Almost 2 hours of the ceremony consists of speeches. That's the real boring part. Why don't they limit the number of speakers? They could reduce the time of the ceremony over an hour if they just focused on the important people.
Yeah, I guess you're right. But what about the auditorium? Each student is only allowed 2 invitations to the ceremony. But if they separate the events, then you can bring more of your family and friends. Don't you want more people to come?
So why don't they just have the ceremony outside? Most universities have their graduation ceremonies outside. They're always in June when the weather is warm and it hardly ever rains. And of course, there's plenty of space on the Great Lawn and the Quad. I don't know about you, but I would much rather graduate outside in the sun than in a stuffy auditorium.
Now, answer the question. The woman expresses her opinion on the change to the graduation ceremony. State her opinion and explain the reason she gives for holding that opinion. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. The reading passage announces a change on campus. In particular, the administration has decided to split the graduation ceremony into 2 separate events. Right off the bat, the woman makes it clear that she is against this idea. To start, she says that she wants to graduate with her friends, and if the ceremony is split, then they can't graduate together. She does admit that the graduation ceremony is too long right now, but it could be shortened by reducing the number of speakers. Secondly, she explains that the graduation event should be held outside rather than in the auditorium if the committee is concerned about space. Most other schools hold their graduation events outside, and there would be plenty of space for additional guests. As you can see, the woman in the listening clearly disagrees with this plan. Directions. You will now read a short passage, then listen to a lecture on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Now read a passage from a biology textbook. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a lecture about this topic in an ecology class.
So, ballast water can have negative consequences for the environment. This, of course, is because ballast water transfers various species from one body of water to another. The case of the zebra mussels in the Great Lakes is a good example of this. Now, the zebra mussel is a freshwater mussel native to the Black and Caspian Seas. In the 1980s, ships traveling across the Atlantic carried zebra mussels from these seas to the Great Lakes in the USA. When the ships dumped their ballast water, they introduced the zebra mussels into the lakes. These shellfish have completely invaded the Great Lakes, killing off hundreds of native species for good. Since then, zebra mussels have continued to spread throughout major waterways in America. But ballast water is not only dangerous for the plants and animals living in the water. Viruses and bacteria can also travel around the world through these ships' tanks. Human contact with infected waters can lead to the spread of diseases. A strand of cholera, native only to a small region in Bangladesh, made its way all the way to Peru back in 1991. An epidemic broke out and spread from Brazil to Chile and then throughout Latin America. Over 10,000 people died from this disease over the next 3 years. Researchers later found that ballast water was to blame. Subsequently, the International Maritime Organization has developed new and innovative methods to balance ships and reduce the need for ballast water.
Now, answer the question. Explain how the examples from the lecture illustrate the negative consequences of ballast water. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now.
The reading passage introduces ballast water, which is the water that is pumped out of ships when they pick up their cargo. When it is pumped into non-native waters, ballast water can have a negative impact on the environment. The speaker in the lecture provides 2 examples of the problems with ballast water. To start, she explains how species can be transferred within this water to a new ecosystem. This was true for the zebra mussel, which was transferred across the Atlantic to the US. They have since invaded the lakes and rivers in America, killing off many other species in the water. The professor goes on to say that plants and animals are not the only ones at risk. A terrible disease was able to travel from Bangladesh to Peru through ballast water. It spread throughout South America and killed thousands of people.
Directions. You will now read a short passage and then listen to a lecture on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about the passages. After you hear the question, you will have 30 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. You have 45 seconds to read the passage below. You may begin reading now. Now listen to a lecture about this topic in a biology class.
Okay, as I'm sure you gathered from the reading, swarm intelligence is kind of like one big decentralized brain. All of these individual brains come together to create one collective consciousness that everyone shares. These days, this type of intelligence is actually being used in the field of artificial intelligence, but it was originally found in nature and many insects use it to create organized living systems. Take ants, for example. They will work together to find the shortest route to a food source and work together to carry it back to the nest. Now, how do they communicate? Well, the individual ants mark their route with their scent, also known as a pheromone. This scent, left by one individual ant, will be sensed and followed by other members of the colony. And the more ants that follow the same trail, the more pheromones they leave behind. The path turns into a kind of ant superhighway. Other possible routes no longer seem available to the colony since there is no pheromone trail for others to follow. Ants aren't the only insects that use swarm intelligence. Honeybees also utilize collective communication to organize masses of individuals. During adverse weather conditions, a thunderstorm for example, bees may lose their nest and must find a new home. However, it takes time to find an ideal location and build their new home. So, the queen bee will find a branch on a tree and send out pheromones that the worker bees follow. Once they find their queen, the worker bees will collect and press together, forming a kind of giant pine cone that could include up to 10,000 bees, if you can believe it. Now, there would be no way for a single bee to survive such weather if it was working by itself.
Now, answer the question. Using the examples from the lecture, explain the concept of swarm intelligence. You have 30 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now.
According to the reading, Swarm intelligence is when a bunch of different insects of the same species are able to combine and connect their thoughts so hundreds of individuals can think and act as one. In the lecture, the professor delves deeper into this subject by explaining that ants use this type of thinking when gathering food. One group of ants will find a way to the food source and release pheromones to mark the trail. Other ants will then follow the pheromone scent. He goes on to say that honeybees use this type of intelligence when looking for a new place to live. In fact, a queen bee might send out a pheromone that attracts thousands of other bees that come together and form a kind of temporary home where the bees can survive. So, after listening, I now have a better understanding of what swarm intelligence is.
Directions. You will now listen to part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Now listen to part of a lecture in an astronomy class.
Okay, listen up, class. Let's go over the topic from yesterday's reading about habitable zones. So, why is there life on Earth? Why not Mars or Venus? Well, Earth exists within the habitable zones. That is to say, it resides at a designated distance from our sun that is not too far and not too close, and it also possesses other key factors that allow life to grow. Astronomers believe there are other planets, like Earth, which exist at the right distance from their own stars. The two main characteristics that a planet within a habitable zone must possess in order to foster life are liquid water and an atmosphere. So, in order for extraterrestrial life to exist in the universe, scientists believe they must have access to liquid water. A planet in the habitable zone should have a core temperature, which allows for the formation of water. Consider Earth, again, as an example. Earth is made up of over 70% water, and it has been proven in evolutionary science that all life on Earth first evolved from the sea. Therefore, the presence of water is crucial for a planet in the habitable zone. Now, an atmosphere is the second necessary characteristic of a habitable zone planet. An atmosphere creates a protective boundary around the land. This allows energy from the star's rays to reach the surface, but also protects the planet from the harmful effects of radiation. The atmosphere also provides the chemicals that are necessary for life to form, like carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Earth's atmosphere is divided into 5 layers, which total about 100 miles of protective covering from the sun's harmful radiation, while also allowing in enough heat to keep us warm.
Now, answer the question. Using points and examples from the talk, explain the 2 necessary characteristics of a habitable zone. You have 20 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now.
In the lecture, the speaker discusses the topic of habitable zones. A habitable zone refers to a position a planet is from its star, like Earth's position from the sun, where life is possible. The professor then goes on to describe two factors that determine whether life can be created. For one, the planet must have liquid water. With the example of Earth, life was first formed in our oceans, and now all living things on our planet need water to survive. The second factor is the presence of an atmosphere. Atmospheres protect the life on a planet from the radiation of its closest star, like the way our atmosphere protects us from the sun's harmful rays. The atmosphere also contains certain chemicals that are required for life to begin. And that pretty much sums up the professor's talk on habitable zones.
Directions. You will now listen to part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, you will have 20 seconds to prepare your response and 60 seconds to speak. Now listen to part of a lecture in an archaeology class.
Preservation of archaeological artifacts for future generations is an important task. Although the deterioration of objects and materials is inevitable, proper preservation can make the process much slower. Creating the ideal conditions in museums is extremely important because historical artifacts can be affected by various environmental factors. The most important are temperature and relative humidity. Maintaining a stable temperature in museums and storage centers is critical. The same temperature should be maintained every day, and all night. Actually, a sudden change in temperature is more dangerous than having no climate control at all. Objects made from organic materials like paper, wood, or leather may wither and dry out if exposed to a sudden temperature fluctuation. Most museums maintain a temperature of between 68 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and it takes every possible step to ensure there is little to no variation. If, for example, a city loses power, many museums have backup power sources to ensure that their interior temperature remains constant. Relative humidity, which is the amount of moisture in the air, could also have a negative effect on ancient artifacts. In metal objects, a high level of relative humidity could cause the object to corrode or develop mold. In contrast, low humidity could cause paper or leather to turn more brittle and fragile. Ideally, there should be a different level of humidity for different collections, depending on the material of the artifacts in question. Still, most museums set their humidity levels somewhere between 45 to 50%. Throughout most modern museums, sensors have been installed that monitor the amount of humidity in the air. Once the level of humidity changes by over 2%, the system takes action and adjusts its settings.
Now, answer the question. Using points and examples from the talk, describe how museums preserve artifacts. You have 20 seconds to prepare your response. You may begin preparing now. You now have 60 seconds to speak. You may begin speaking now. The professor goes into a ton of detail about the preservation of artifacts in museums, which helps slow down the deterioration process of these ancient objects. After introducing the topic, the lecturer mentions that a stable temperature is key. Materials like paper and wood dry out easily if the temperature changes too drastically, which is why most museums keep the temperature between 68 to 72 degrees. Many museums even have backup power sources just in case they lose electricity so they can maintain the temperature. The professor goes on to say that the moisture in the air, otherwise known as relative humidity, must be carefully controlled. For metal objects, higher humidity levels could lead to corrosion. On the other hand, low humidity can make objects like paper more fragile. Most places housing artifacts keep the relative humidity between 45 to 50%. So, after hearing this lecture, I now have a better understanding of how museums preserve their artifacts.
All right, congratulations. Look at you, making it to the end. Good job. You've practiced 10 TOEFL speaking questions. Not the easiest thing to do. If you feel like you need more help, you need more practice, check out tstprep.com. And it's particularly for speaking, check out our TOEFL speaking evaluation with a TOEFL teacher. But if you are ready to practice the TOEFL speaking like on test day, I'm going to put a link to a video that is a TOEFL speaking test, a complete test, the same type that you would see on test day. So check that out. But thank you for staying. Good job. Be proud of yourself, and I will see you in the next one.